Hello everyone, it's Saoirse, and today we are kicking it 1920 style, hence my faux bob. Let's say a prayer right now that it stays up for this whole video. There's a lot of pins in there. So today I want to talk to you about This Side of Paradise by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now this was Fitzgerald's first novel, and he experienced great success with it. Hello, can we all be that lucky? I mean, he wasn't that lucky like later in life, but really incredible to come out. I think he was 23, 23, and just have a knockout first novel. So I'm just going to read the back of this for you. And this is mostly, with a classic, the back is always just praise, 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 not so much about, plot. One of the most brilliant first novels in the history of American literature, This Side of Paradise launched F. Scott Fitzgerald's literary career. Published in 1920 when the author was just 23, it is about the education of a youth, and to this universal story, Fitzgerald brought the promise of everything that was new in the vigorous, restless America of the years following World War I. Amory Blaine, egoistic, versatile, callow, and imaginative, inhabits a book that is interwoven with songs, poems, play scripts, questions, and answers. His growth from self-absorption to sexual awareness and personhood is described with a continuous improvisatory energy and delight. Far from being distracting, Fitzgerald's formal inventiveness and verve only heighten our sense that the world being described is our own modern world. Okay. So Fitzgerald was born in 1896 in St. Paul, Minnesota, and he died in 1940, leaving his last novel unfinished. So my plan for this year, I've only read The Great Gatsby before this. My plan was to read all of his books. There's only 4 finished novels, and including The Great Gatsby. So I'll reread that one. I can't remember the order. There's This Side of Paradise, and then either The Beautiful and Damned or Tender is the Night, and then The Great Gatsby, and then whatever the other one was. And he has short stories too, but apparently he really hated his short stories, and he wrote them just because he needed the money, which is really sad. I delved into all this stuff about his life with Zelda, and it's very interesting, really sad near the end. But we're just going to talk about this book right now. So let's jump in. I really loved the first page, but then I found that I didn't really vibe with this book as much as I had hoped, because I really loved The Great Gatsby. But let's talk about it. So it's sectioned into there's book 1, there's all these headings, and there's 1, 2, 3, whatever. So Amory, son of Beatrice. Amory Blaine inherited from his mother every trait, except the stray, inexpressible few that made him worthwhile. His father, an ineffectual, inarticulate man with a taste for Byron and a habit of drowsing over the Encyclopedia Britannica, grew wealthy at 30 through the death of 2 elder brothers, successful Chicago brokers, and in the first flush of feeling that the world was his, went to Bar Harbor and met Beatrice O'Hara. In consequence, Stephen Blaine handed down to posterity his height of just under 6 feet and his tendency to waver at crucial moments, these 2 abstractions appearing in his son Amory. For many years he hovered in the background of his family's life, an unassertive figure with a face half obliterated by lifeless silky hair, continually occupied in taking care of his wife, continually harassed by the idea that he didn't and couldn't understand her. So he really had me from that first paragraph. I was like, ooh, this is sassy. I really like these descriptions of his parents. I get frustrated when authors really go in on their first paragraph, and then the rest of the book doesn't feel like it's the same style or the same intensity. So I felt like it kind of lost it. Let me just read you the last sentence on this page. All in all, Beatrice O'Hara absorbed the sort of education that will be quite impossible ever again, a tutelage measured by the number of things and people one could be contemptuous of and charming about, a culture rich in all arts and traditions, barren of all ideas, in the last of those days when the great gardener clipped the inferior roses to produce one perfect bud. So this book is largely about education, but it feels very of its time, which I'll get into more later, but I can see why in 1920 it would have been very, very effective, especially for people who understood this lifestyle, or people who would mourn the passing of a time when the gardener clipped the inferior roses to produce one perfect bud. It's really telling us how times are changing. Here's another bit about Beatrice. I wish there was more of her in here. I love the descriptions of her. From his 4th to his 10th year, he did the country with his mother in her father's private car, from Coronado, where his mother became so bored that she had a nervous breakdown in a fashionable hotel, down to Mexico City, where she took a mild, almost epidemic consumption. This trouble pleased her, and later she made use of it as an intrinsic part of her atmosphere, especially after several astounding bracers. I'm always surprised by books that were written so long ago, but like are very they're very clearly talking about issues that, I don't know, I think our idea of the past is that it's very, straight-laced, buttoned up, everybody's just very Victorian. But the truth is that was the Victorian era, and that's, the time period before this. And the people in this era are really coming out of that, and their mothers and fathers are Victorian, but they're being a lot more wild and open, drinking a lot, doing a lot of drugs, and having sex, and you just don't expect it, or at least I don't expect it. I always forget that they were much more open already by the 20s. So let's go on to, there are some really inventive images in here which I love, like the invitation to Miss Myra St. Clair's bobbing party spent the morning in his coat pocket, where it had an intense physical affair with a dusty piece of peanut brittle. I just love when writers can take something mundane, there's an invitation in his pocket, and make it really silly and fun and different. So that's what I appreciate about his writing. I think a lot of people are afraid of reading books from this era because, I'm gonna get caught in my hair, because they're afraid it's gonna be so, again, what word am I looking for? Old-fashioned, but you know what I mean, just very like that, but that in words, if you know what I mean. And it's the reason a lot of people are afraid of the Brontes, which I will say over and over, don't be afraid of them. And don't be afraid of Fitzgerald. He writes as a lot of people would now. I mean, it doesn't feel like really old-fashioned writing, is what I mean. Let us go on to I'm already on it. So this was an interesting bit about, I didn't love Amory as a character. Didn't love him. It's hard to love him. But I find this interesting, his struggle with becoming versus being. So it says, always after he was in bed there were voices, indefinite, fading and chanting, just outside his window, and before he fell asleep he would dream one of his favorite waking dreams, the one about becoming a great halfback, or the one about the Japanese invasion, when he was rewarded by being made the youngest general in the world. It was always the becoming he dreamed of, never the being. This, too, was quite characteristic of Amory. And I love that. I relate to that struggle, where you can dream about something for so long and it totally consumes you, and you always feel like, I will be happy, this will be it, this is the end-all be-all. If I get this thing, if I make this accomplishment happen for myself, I will be happy. But it's always the transition period, the becoming that, becoming a great football player. But you don't think about the being part, the years that come after that when you are maintaining that dream. That's the really scary part. That's not as fun to think about. Oh, this quote. Okay, how many of you have heard this quote? They slipped briskly into an intimacy from which they never recovered. I've heard that so many times, and I have seen it printed on things on Etsy, and it's always used as this romantic thing, buy this thing that says this for your partner. This quote is not a romantic quote. It's referring to Amory's friendship with Monsignor Darcy, an old church man. And they just have a good intellectual connection. It's not it's I just feel like that quote is misused so much. I see it all the time. And when I saw that, I was like, whoa, no way. That's just always fun. I love unintentionally finding quotes that I have heard my entire life and didn't know like which classic novel they were from. Anyway, that was just fun for me. A little moment. Okay, so Emery loves talking about himself and trying to figure himself out. He says, well, somebody says to him, "You're right, I wouldn't have liked it. Still, it's hard to be made a cynic at 20. And he says, "I was born one." Amory murmured, "I'm a cynical idealist." He paused and wondered if that meant anything. It's like he's always saying things and then thinking like, was that brilliant? What's the next brilliant thing I can say? So a cynical idealist. I think that describes him well. And I couldn't help many times thinking of The Catcher in the Rye. Because, it's about, a kid of the same sort of age in America, in a prep school situation, who does a lot of self-reflection. And, we know Holden Caulfield is very cynical. So, yeah, I couldn't help making comparisons in my head. So Amory definitely, he's really cynical about people, and he's really mean. He doesn't give people a chance to be themselves. I think he really comes up with a snap judgment about somebody, and then that person is that thing, and they can't, nobody really exists as themselves. They exist as the way Amory sees them or wants them to be, or interprets them right away, and then he can't get rid of that interpretation. But on the other hand, he's also an idealist, and seems to be like this big romantic. So he's definitely got these sides of him fighting, which I can sympathize with, but at the same time, he's not a very sympathetic character. And I'm sure some people will disagree with that. That's the fun thing about literature. So this is an interesting bit here. There's this conversation about, with Monsignor Darcy, about personality versus personage. So Monsignor says, "We have to do it because we're not personalities, but personages." Amory said, "That's a good line. What do you mean?" "A personality is what you thought you were, what this Carrie and Sloane you tell me of evidently are. Personality is a physical matter almost entirely. It lowers the people it acts on. I've seen it vanish in a long sickness. But while a personality is active, it overrides the next thing. Now a personage, on the other hand, gathers. He is never thought of apart from what he's done. He's a bar on which 1,000 things have been hung, glittering things sometimes, as ours are. But he uses those things with a cold mentality back of them." What does that mean? I don't know. And Amory says, "And several of my most glittering possessions had fallen off when I needed them." I'm not sure quite what my thought is on this. I'd heard the word personage before, mostly in Victorian literature, and I never really thought about the difference between a personality and a personage. I love the slight differences in the meaning of words that we might use interchangeably in our language, but they all have different connotations. That's what makes translation so frustrating to me, as I've always said, that I'm afraid I'm not going to get the exact meaning of something because there are such delicate little connotation differences with words. Anyway, I guess I didn't have anything too thought out on that, but it makes me think. I just don't have anything coherent yet. This is a bit about Rosalind, who Amory ends up having a relationship with. And I just liked this, I guess. "Cecilia, darling, you don't know what a trial it is to be like me. I've got to keep my face like steel in the street to keep men from winking at me. If I laugh hard from a front row in the theater, the comedian plays to me for the rest of the evening. If I drop my voice, my eyes, my handkerchief at a dance, my partner calls me up on the phone every day for a week." And then Cecilia says, "It must be an awful strain." Rosalind, The unfortunate part is that the only men who interest me at all are the totally ineligible ones. I mean, she sounds like awful, but at the same time, I'm like, I get it. You know, we always go after the ineligible ones. I just like the description of a woman who so clearly knows her effect on people and can voice it in that way. Of course, all of these characters are just pretty wildly unlikable. Oh, this is another of her lines. And this is one of those parts where the text is written as a script, interestingly. Just kind of suddenly. And I'm not sure I love that it's just like random like that, because I'd like to know the purpose that it serves. But whatever. She says, there used to be two kinds of kisses. First when girls were kissed and deserted, second when they were engaged. Now there's a third kind, where the man is kissed and deserted. If Mr. Jones of the 90s, the 1890s, bragged he'd kissed a girl, everyone knew he was through with her. If Mr. Jones of 1919 brags the same, everyone knows it's because he can't kiss her anymore. Given a decent start, any girl can beat a man nowadays. I just liked that. Okay, this part gets a little bit dark. And this is Amory. Amory's having a bad time here. Decided to commit suicide, he announced suddenly. When? Next year? Now, tomorrow morning. Going to take a room at the Commodore, get into a hot bath, and open a vein. He's getting morbid. You need another rye, old boy. We'll all talk it over tomorrow. But Amory was not to be dissuaded from argument, at least. He says, did you ever get that way? And somebody says, sure, often. My chronic state. And the way they talk about it just like so lightheartedly that they're all just chronically suicidal. I think it's so quietly tragic, and Fitzgerald doesn't make a big deal of it. But the fact that it's just there, all these boys who have been forced into going to war and come back, and they're definitely not in that time able to understand what's happened to them. There's no talk of PTSD, but you have to think it's greatly affected them negatively. Anyway, let's go on to the next thing. I thought this part was funny. Emery's hanging out with Tom. Existence had settled back to an ambitionless normality. They had decided that with economy they could still afford the apartment, which Tom, with the domesticity of an elderly cat, had grown fond of. The old English hunting prints on the wall were Tom's, and a large tapestry, by courtesy a relic of decadent days in college, and the great profusion of orphaned candlesticks, and the carved Louis XV chair in which no one could sit more than a minute without acute spinal disorders. Tom claimed that this was because one was sitting in the lap of Montespan's wreath. At any rate, it was Tom's furniture that decided them to stay. I just love a description of a chair. Couldn't sit without acute spinal disorders. And it just made me think of how I surround myself with things that I think are beautiful but maybe are not that comfortable, like my Victorian love seat. It's not really something you can stretch out on or take a decent nap on. Your hips kind of start to hurt a little bit, but it's so pretty. So I just loved that. Let's see here. First up. Trouble is, I get distracted when I start to write stories. Get afraid I'm doing it instead of living. Get thinking maybe life is waiting for me in the Japanese gardens at the Ritz or at Atlantic City or on the Lower East Side. So I wrote a note like fear of missing out. And I guess I feel this way with reading and writing, that I'm living in these stories rather than experiencing real life. Sorry, the garbage truck is probably going to make some sounds right now. But yeah, I definitely get that. I feel like I escape to books so much, and then I start to worry, like, have I just been existing inside pages my whole life? Uh-oh. Oh crap, I need to hustle here. Oh, this is about love and sex. Listen, she leaned close again. I like clever men and good-looking men, and of course no one cares more for personality than I do. Oh, just one person in 50 has any glimmer of what sex is. I'm hipped on Freud and all that, but it's rotten that every bit of real love in the world is 99% passion and one little soupçon of jealousy. I just like the narrative about sex and relationships in this book. Sentimentalists. No, wait. Youth is like having a big plate of candy. Sentimentalists think they want to be in the pure, simple state they were in before they ate the candy. They don't. They just want the fun of eating it all over again. The matron doesn't want to repeat her girlhood. She wants to repeat her honeymoon. I don't want to repeat my innocence. I want the pleasure of losing it again. Again, not much to say about that. It's just like these little observations, these sad little observations about life and the way we navigate it. Is what I enjoyed about this. Self-awareness. Probably more than any concrete vice or failing, Emery despised his own personality. He loathed knowing that tomorrow and the 1,000 days after he would swell pompously at a compliment and sulk at an ill word like a third-rate musician or a first-class actor. He was ashamed of the fact that very simple and honest people usually distrusted him, that he had been cruel often to those who had sunk their personalities in him, several girls and a man here and there through college, that he had been an evil influence on people who had followed him here and there into mental adventures from which he alone rebounded unscathed. So I think he has a lot of self-hatred going on, and he's aware of it. He's aware of his flaws, but he just can't figure out how to change. He found something that he wanted, had always wanted, and always would want. Not to be admired as he had feared, not to be loved as he had made himself believe, but to be necessary to people, to be indispensable. I think that's a really important part where he's finally figured out what his purpose in life could be, that he could be proud of. But it's still a little bit selfish, like being indispensable to people. You want to help people, but it's also kind of for you. Okay, this discussion about the middle class. They don't think uneducated people should be highly paid, but they won't see that if they don't pay the uneducated people, their children are going to be uneducated too. And we're going round and round in a circle. That is the great middle class. So there's a lot of commentary in here about wealth, rich versus poor, middle class, education, how you spend so much on education to then be still unemployable sometimes and kind of not ready for the real world because you've been coddled in this prep school environment. So I think a lot of what I got out of this book was this tale of self-discovery and fighting the self-discovery that is happening, so you know what you need to change, you know what you don't like about yourself, and yet you feel so powerless to fight it, perhaps because of the environment that you grew up in, or the people you were raised by. So I found that there's a real similar theme to Catcher in the Rye, but I didn't find it as emotionally effective, and I know they're not the same book, they're from a different time period and everything, but yeah, I just was not emotionally connected to the character of Emery like I was with Holden by the end. So I just felt like the book was very exclusive, like it was very of its time, it's prep school literature. If you didn't live in this time and didn't really relate to what he was saying about his education and all that, it won't be as effective. But then again, you know, I didn't live in 1860 and yet I still love that literature. So I don't know, but I find some classics can still speak to things that are happening in modern times, like they're still able to translate to modern times. So please let me know your thoughts on this. Did you feel like it holds up and can be read in a way that we relate to it today, or is it okay to just accept it as a really wonderful masterpiece of its time? Let me know what you think. Wow, I'm out of time. Thank you so much for watching, and happy reading, everyone.